What's up guys, and welcome back to Retro Gamer Gen X's Retro Gaming channel. And in today's video we're going to be diving into the history of Generation 1 video game consoles. Kind of like this Pong console right here and the Atari Video Pinball I have up on the screen behind me. If you guys are into these old retro video game consoles, this is definitely going to be the video for you. Now at the end of every year, what I do is compile all my look-ats and my history videos together, and what I'm trying to do is just make the biggest and best compilation of retro video game history that is on YouTube. So anything you guys want to know about video game history, you can come to these videos and watch them. So this is going to be the first in the series that I put out this December. So keep a lookout. I'm going to be doing these generational videos. So this is going to be first gen. So the second gen will be coming up here soon. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get to the video, and you guys have a great one.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, the electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey gives you all the exciting action of hockey and 11 other challenging play and learning games for the entire family. Odyssey, a new dimension for your television, now at your Magnavox dealer. He's listed in the yellow pages.
The story of the Magnavox Odyssey starts in the 1950s. Ralph Baer was working for Loral Electronics, a military contractor. He had been tasked with engineering a new television set. While in the design phase, he thought of adding something extra to the TV. He wanted the customer to not only watch what was being broadcast over the air, but to be able to control games on the TV as well. Loral passed on the idea, and it was mostly forgotten until the 1960s. In 1966, Baer was working for Sanders Associates, another military contractor. While waiting for a bus one day, he remembered the idea he had back in the 50s. He had also seen Tennis for Two back in the late 50s, which was a game created by William Higginbotham at the Brookhaven National Laboratory using the fundamentals of trajectory and wind resistance from military programs to create a tennis game. The next day, he wrote a 4-page proposal for a game box that would connect to a TV at a sale price of $25. In the proposal, he said it would tune into a channel just like you do to watch TV. He referred to this channel as LP, or Let's Play. Because Sanders Associates was a military contractor, he chose a small room and picked one of his technicians, Bob Trimley, to work on it and get it ready to present to his bosses at Sanders Associates. By December of '66, they had completed the first design called the TV Game No. 1. It had a very simple design in which you could move a vertical line on the screen. He showed this to the director of R&D, Herbert Campman, which initially didn't want to fund this, but agreed to due to the possible military applications, and gave them $2,000 for labor and $500 for materials to develop the project. Baer worked on the project, designed more prototypes, and by February of '67, he assigned another technician, Bill Harrison, the task of building it. During this time, Baer worked with another engineer, Bill Rausch, on making the games for the device. He developed the first games for the system, including a 2-player game where the players competed to fill buckets of water, the first button masher. Other games, such as one where 2 players are dots on the screen and try to chase and tag each other, and another that used a light gun where you had to shoot a dot on the screen controlled by the other player. Baer showed this design to Campman, and he really enjoyed the light gun game. Advised Baer to show the device to senior project management. He showed the device to the board, but most were uninterested in it as it really didn't have any military uses. Despite this, CEO Roden Sanders approved the project to be developed as a commercial product with the aim of either selling it or licensing it. By August of '67, Baer had realized that his goal of $25 per unit would not be obtainable due to the cost of the components. He also was having a hard time developing good games for the system. This is when they brought on Bill Rausch again, as he had helped develop the first few games for the system. Rausch had made it possible to have another spot on the screen, this one being computer controlled. This was made into a ping pong type game where it had 2 players that controlled the spots and a computer controlled one, being the ball. Also at this time, they decided to sell the rights to the system as Sanders & Associates was not in the consumer market. This prototype was shown to Teleprompter, a cable TV provider. They were interested in the product, but due to fiscal issues that hit the company, they backed out of the deal. In April of '68, Sanders and Associates also hit some hard times. The project was put on hold after a fifth prototype was created, and mass layoffs came to the company. At this time, Rouse was let go. Work started on the project again, and 2 more prototypes were made, the 7th being named the Brown Box. It got its name due to the wood grain stickers on the sides of the case. Bear had shown the product to several TV companies to try to get a buyer.
I think we ought to move right on now to the first of our 3 scenarios, the TV gaming, and hopefully we'll have some fun here. And if you'll all gather around, we will play a game of ping pong together. Well, here we are, playing ping pong when we ought to be working. Here's our ball volleying back and forth. 1 free ball plus 1 net, courtesy of the local CATV station. Here's my partner Bill, and we're going to play ping pong for you in a minute. But before we do, I'd like to show you the controls that we're using, which are part of the plug-in module, the ping pong plug-in module, gaming plug-in module of the all-purpose box we talked about earlier. There is a horizontal knob here, as you can see, which, when I twiddle it, moves my paddle from left to right. There's a vertical control, which moves my paddle up and down. Finally, there's an English knob, which allows me to put curves on the ball, control the vertical position of the ball as it leaves my paddle. Whenever I intercept the ball, if I don't miss it, and bat it back at my opponent, I have control over the ball's vertical position, and that's what the English knob is for. And watch me fake him out in a minute. There's another control here, a serve knob, which puts the ball into play, serves it from my side if it's out of play, on my position, if it should go out of play. In Bill's position, he's got the same kind of a button right here. He pushes it, and the ball comes in from that side. Ready?
It's on your side.
It's on my side? Okay, let's go. Let me move away from the net a bit. Here we go. A 1, a 2, a 3, and down I go. And up I go, and down I go. Now watch me take him up. I didn't do it. I did it this time. Okay. Whoops. 1, 2. You want to score, Bill?
Sure.
Okay, 1-0. Here we go. Up and down and up. He's getting tricky. Missed it. 1 up. Keep it on the table, Bear. Here we go. Fake the out again. 2 to 1. We'll play up to 5. Huh? Good show. Get closer to the net. Make it a little faster. Up. 2 up. Missed it again. 3 to 2. I guess that makes it count of 5. Huh? Okay. Who else would like to play? Why don't you come on and play the game against my evil partner here, Richard?
RCA was interested in the product, but an agreement could not be reached and the deal didn't go through. About this time, Bill Enders left RCA for Magnavox. Magnavox had seen the console before but declined to buy it. Enders convinced them to take another look at it in July of '69. The executives at Magnavox still weren't impressed with the product, but Vice President of Magnavox Console Product Planning, Jerry Martin, by the way, console meaning console TVs, liked the idea and agreed to produce the console. This might be where the origin of the Monkeyer video game console came from. Negotiations went on for a couple years and they finally signed a deal in January of 1971. George Kenton of Magnavox turned the prototype into a final product that was sold to consumers. He had designed the case and re-engineered the internal components of the system. To save costs, they took away the color display and made it black and white. They also got rid of all the controllers except for the 3-dial analog controller. Also, instead of using a dial on the console to select games, they came up with a games card that would be inserted into the machine to select the game you wanted to play. They also decided to go with DTL logic instead of ICs to save cost. At the time, ICs were still more expensive than individual components. Magnavox first named the console Skillovision, but by its release it was renamed the Odyssey. The rifle was to be sold as an add-on for the system with the rifle game card Shooting Gallery. They also included board-type games to the product to enhance the games themselves. Bear was not a fan of the board game pieces such as the dice, chips, cards, and plastic overlays, but Magnavox now owned the rights and felt this added to the games. With the new additions, it raised the price of the console up to $99 per unit. The console was unveiled during playtests in LA and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and demoed to dealers in Las Vegas in May of 1972. The console was publicly unveiled at the Tavern of Green in New York on May 22, 1972, which Magnavox announced the launch date of September of 72. This was the day that Nolan Bushnell saw the Odyssey and came up with the idea of Pong. The sales would be restricted to just 18 dealers in major metropolitan areas. It was demonstrated for the next few months at dealers until the launch. The Odyssey launched in mid-September of 1972 with an initial order of 50,000 units until manufacturing ramped up. All the consoles would be sold at Magnavox dealers. Eventually, between 120 to 140,000 units were produced in 1972, but only 69,000 units were sold. Bear thought this was due to the high price of the unit, but as it turns out, people were confused about the console. Seeing it was only sold at Magnavox dealers, they thought it only worked with Magnavox TVs. Due to low sales, Magnavox thought about discontinuing the product after the holiday season. To help with sales, they lowered the price of the unit to $50 with the purchase of a TV. Also, more games were made, and the light gun add-on game was sold as well. The unit started to be sold worldwide in 1973, and sales started to pick up. In late 1973, Magnavox started a large advertising campaign for the upcoming holiday season. As demand rose, they produced more consoles. By 1974, it appeared in the Sears Wish Book for sale. 1974 was the best year for sales, selling more than 129,000 units. Then in 1974, Magnavox signed a deal with Texas Instruments to use their ICs in a newly designed, cost-reduced console that would become the Odyssey dedicated console series, such as the Odyssey 100 and 200. The Magnavox Odyssey was discontinued in 1975 to make way for the newer Odyssey series of consoles. It had a 3-year lifespan from 1972 to 1975, selling more than 350,000 units in total, and being the world's first video game console. Oh, hey, you guys are still here. Well, if you guys like the content, don't forget to hit that like, that subscribe, and that notification bell. That way you get notifications every time I drop new content like this. So I'm going to go ahead and get back to this game. Why don't you guys go ahead and get back to the video here.
Doreen, I'm sure when you went out last week to play Pong, you got to having so much fun, you just plain forgot to come home. We all miss you, Doreen. But guess what? Atari, inventors of them electronic games you put the quarters in, just made Pong for home TVs. Score keeping and all. Pong, invented by Atari. Now at last you can play at home. Don't win, darling. Come on back home.
The story of the Pong console really starts way back in the 1950s, 1958 to be exact, when physicist William Higginbotham designed Tennis for Two, which was a computer game based on the game of tennis. Two players would go head-to-head with a ball that would bounce back and forth. So really, this was the first Pong-type game that was developed, and this was way back in the 1950s. This deserves a video all on its own. But let's fast forward a few years. In 1966, another engineer named Ralph Baer worked for a company called Sanders & Associates. It's now called BA Systems and is a military contractor. Baer came up with the idea to play games on a television set, and he thought it would be a marketable idea. And Sanders & Associates green-lighted the idea. At about the same time, 3 different young engineers were hopping onto the scene. One named Nolan Bushnell that recently graduated from the University of Utah's College of Electrical Engineering. He is one of the few students that got to play around on the digital computer mainframe and got to play the original Space War video game. He had to work his way through college and worked at the Lagoon Amusement Park in Utah. There he saw electromechanical machines, specifically Chicago Coins Speedway racing game, and it inspired him to want to create his own arcade games. Also at this time, a young engineer named Ted Danby had just gotten out the military. He had learned a ton of electrical experience while enlisted, and his first civilian job was with Bank of America to work on electrical mechanical accounting machines. Then he was hired on by Hewlett-Packard, but didn't stay there too long. Within a few weeks, he moved on to Ampex. This was in 1961. Nolan Bushnell eventually got hired on with Ampex as well, and in 1971, Ampex hired another young engineer named Alan Alcorn, who recently graduated from the University of California, Berkeley. Bushnell and Danby formed a company called Syzygy and developed a clone system of the video game Space War that they had played on the DEC mainframe in college. The prototype was developed by Danby, and Bushnell did the marketing, trying to find somebody that could manufacture it for them. They found Nutting & Associates, which was the maker of coin-op trivia games and shooting games, and decided to go with them. They fabricated the fiberglass cabinet and inserted a coin mech and the electronics. Although sales exceeded $3 million, it was still considered a commercial failure. It was at this point that Danby and Bushnell decided to rename the company due to trademark issues because Syzygy was already taken by another company. So they decided to name the company Atari. The name comes from the ancient Japanese board game named Go, and Atari is when you hit a target in a game. In 1971, they hired Alcorn from Ampex as well. Bushnell assigned Alcorn a task to create a new video game, something that Atari would distribute themselves without a third-party distributor. Bushnell really wanted a racing game to be created, but instead he wanted Alcorn's first project to be easy on him. Bushnell went to a trade show in New York and saw the Magnavox Odyssey that Bear had developed with Magnavox. Magnavox showed off the system while they were still waiting on the patent to go through. This is supposedly where Bushnell came up with the idea of Pong. He put Al Alcorn in charge of developing this new video game. After Alcorn developed the circuitry, he bought a Hitachi black and white television and put it into a cabinet they hand-built and wired it all together. They put the prototype into Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California in August of 1972, and within a week and a half, the owner of the tavern called and said that the game was having problems and wasn't working anymore. They came down expecting the circuitry or something to be broke. But the problem was, it was just jam-packed full of quarters, and Atari knew they had a success on their hands. It was at this point that Bushnell wanted to develop a system into a home video game console. This is when Atari hired engineer Harold Lee to work with Al Alcorn. They took Alcorn's design and integrated it into an IC, basically making a Pong on a chip that minimalized the circuitry and really brought the cost down to the consumer. At the time of its release, Atari's Pong on a chip was the highest performing chip used in a consumer product. Now Atari had developed a system, but they needed to find a distributor. Atari had seen that the Magnavox Odyssey had an ad in the Sears catalog, so Atari approached Sears' top executive, Tom Quinn, who really wanted the product, but Atari, believing they could get a better deal elsewhere, declined. Atari showed the console off in January of '75 at a toy fair trying to find a distributor, but this turned out to be unsuccessful. So Atari met back up with Sears and Quinn. They struck a deal that by Christmas season, Atari had to come up with 150,000 units. Although Atari didn't have the capability to produce that many units, Bushnell was able to secure funding through venture capitalist Don Valentine to build a new factory to fulfill Sears' order. The first units were branded Sears Telegames to fulfill the contract. Then Atari products were made. Now, you'd think that this would be the beginning of a great story for Atari, but at this point, in April 1974, Magnavox filed a lawsuit against Atari, along with other manufacturers of Pong clone systems. Bear and Magnavox were saying that Atari had infringed on their trademark, which had finally went through in 1973. In fact, in court, Bushnell did not deny that he had saw the Odyssey and stated, "The fact is, I absolutely did see the Odyssey game, and I did not think that it was very clever." Atari settled out of court for an approximate payment of $1.5 million made payable in 8 installments, and Magnavox obtained the rights to see full information on Atari's products publicly announced over the next year. And if history serves me correct, this is why the VCS was pushed back an additional few months before it was released, so Magnavox wouldn't get any information on it. Atari went on to sell more iterations of a Pong console, including Pong Doubles, Super Pong, and later consoles like Video Pinball. but the original Pong console that debuted in 1975 sold a little over 150,000 units. It was completely discontinued by 1978 and was the Kickstarter for Atari Incorporated.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco, with 3 different games. Telstar Tennis, with digital scoring, variable speeds. Telstar Hockey. Each player controls a goalie plus a forward on the other side. Oops, a goal. And Telstar Singles Handball, a game you play yourself. Telstar Handball, Tennis, Hockey. All 3 at an exciting low price. For great family fun, hitch your TV to a Telstar by Coleco.
The story of Coleco really starts in 1932. This is when Maurice Greenberg opened the Connecticut Leather Company. They started producing leather goods and leather shoe repair kits. During World War II, the demand for business grew, and so did the company. In early 1950s, Maurice Greenberg's son, Leonard Greenberg, joined the company. It was his idea to sell leather lacing and leather craft kits to children at a 1954 toy fair. Their leather moccasins kit was chosen as the child guidance prestige toy, and it was at this point the Connecticut Leather Company decided to go full on with kids' toys. In 1956, Leonard Greenberg bought a technology used to vacuum form plastic, which led the company to develop several small toys made out of plastic, including wading pools. In 1961, the leather and shoe finding portion of the business was sold off, and the Connecticut Leather Company abbreviated its name to Coleco. In 1963, Coleco acquired Castrell Corporation, which was a leading manufacturer of vinyl pools and toys. After this acquisition, Coleco became the largest manufacturer of above-ground swimming pools in the world. In 1966, the company had grown so large that Leonard persuaded his brother Arnold Greenberg to join. After Arnold joined, several other toy manufacturing companies were acquired by Coleco. Coleco enjoyed success during the late 1960s in the toy manufacturing sector. In 1971, Coleco became public on the New York Stock Exchange and then acquired a snowmobile company. After the acquisition of the snowmobile company, sales were very poor in that sector. Coleco had to find a way to make money and make money fast. Right around this time, Arnold Greenberg was named CEO of the company and wanted to get into the growing video game market. Coleco in 1976 started producing the Telstar dedicated game consoles. Nearly all these dedicated systems were built around a General Instruments Pong on a chip, which there was a shortage of at the time. But since Coleco was one of the first to order, they got their entire shipment while other companies didn't. This made Coleco a leader in the dedicated game console market in the 1970s. The sales of the dedicated game consoles allowed Coleco to break even with the failing snowmobile business. Coleco was so successful with the Telstar units, they almost sold 1 million consoles. This put them in second place for the most consoles sold in the first generation.
素晴らしいボールの変化、鮮やかな9色のカラーがゲームの種類によって変わります。ラケットの大きさやボールのスピードが変えられるので、ハイテクニックなゲームが楽しめます。見るテレビから遊べるテレビへ、15種類ものゲームが楽しめるカラーテレビゲーム15、9800円のカラーテレビゲーム6もあります。
The story of Nintendo as we know it started in Kyoto, Japan in 1889. That's right, 1889. Japanese entrepreneur Fuzihiro Yamamuchi started a company named Nintendo Karuta to produce and distribute playing cards. This was a tough business to get into at the time due to a Japanese law that was implemented in 1882 to ban gambling because of organized crime. With this ban, most playing cards were banned as well, and most companies abandoned the playing card business altogether because they didn't want to be associated with criminals. However, one type of card was still being allowed, Hanafuda, or flower cards. This made Nintendo the sole producer of these types of playing cards. At first, they made high-quality cards using expensive manufacturing processes, but later they made cheaper and more cost-efficient cards, making the business very lucrative. It wasn't until 1907 that they started making Western-style playing cards like we use today. They entered an agreement with another Japanese company, Nihoi Senbai, or better known as Japan Tobacco, to sell the cards at their cigarette stores. It was also at this time the company changed its name to Marufuku Nintendo Card Company. A few years later, in 1915, the name was changed again to Yamamuchi Nintendo, but still used the Marufuku Nintendo Card Company brand on their cards. Nintendo continued to produce cards through the 1920s. In 1929, Yuzahiro departed the company. Due to Japanese culture, he would have to leave the company to his male child, but he did not have one. Instead, he adopted his son-in-law, Sekiroyo Kendia, and passed the company on to him. By this time, Nintendo was the largest and most successful playing card company in Japan. Sekiroyo took on the surname of Yamamuchi. In 1933, Sekiroyo created a general partnership and changed the name once again to Yamamuchi Nintendo Company Limited, and constructed a new company headquarters right next to the old one in Kyoto. During this time, Sekiroyo was thinking of the future and who would head the company after him, as he did not have any male children either. His plans were to adopt his son-in-law just as he had been. But he had left his family and the company for unknown reasons, so Sekiroyo made his grandson, Hiroshi Yamamuchi, heir to the company when he decided to retire. Then came World War II, which brought a great financial burden onto the company as people were more concentrated on the war effort than playing games. During this time, Hiroshi's wife, Michiku, which came from a wealthy family, supported the business and kept it going. After the war, things did get better as American soldiers came to Japan and were buying and using Nintendo's playing cards. In 1947, Sekiroyo founded a distribution company for the playing cards called Marufuku Company Limited. This is the company that directly turned into the company we all know today as Nintendo Company Limited. In 1949, Sekiroyo had a devastating stroke, which eventually took his life, and Hiroshi became the third and longest-lasting president of Nintendo. In 1959, Nintendo formed a partnership with Disney to produce playing cards with Disney characters printed on them, bringing Nintendo into the children's market. Also in this year, they moved their company headquarters to a different part of Kyoto. In 1962, Nintendo became a publicly traded company on the Kyoto Stock Exchange. A year later, in 1963, they changed their name for the last time to what we all know, Nintendo Company Limited. Sales started to slump, and by the end of 1964, Nintendo's stock fell to just 60 yen per share. In 1965, Nintendo hired Gunpei Yokoi for his expertise in manufacturing and assembly line production of electronic devices. With this experience, Yamamuchi put him in charge of the games division. They restructured the company to be more related to games, but still kept the division for playing cards. That division later evolved into making Pokemon cards. This is when Nintendo started producing classic board games like chess, mahjong, shogi, and the game that inspired Atari's name, Go. In 1970, Nintendo developed its first electronic toy, the Beam Gun. This was designed by Masuki Yoriyama. It was a light gun that worked with sensors in the targets, and when hit, popped up to show that it was hit. Over 1 million of these units were sold, Nintendo's first successful electronic toy. So successful, in fact, Nintendo partnered with Magnavox to create the light gun used on the very first game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1971. In the early 1970s, Nintendo found success in their games and toys division, but this ended with the 1973 oil crisis. The cost of producing plastic skyrocketed. This took a toll on production costs at Nintendo, losing billions of yen. Nintendo knew they had to do something. They saw the success Magnavox was having with the Odyssey and made a licensing agreement to use their technology to create their own Pong-type console. The Color TV Game 6 launched in 1977 in Japan, being Nintendo's first video game console as well. This became a series of games such as the Color TV 15, Color TV Game 112, Computer TV Game, and Color TV Game Block Breaker. These went on to be the most successful first-gen consoles, selling more than 3 million units, outselling Atari, Magnavox, and Coleco all together. With the success of the Color TV series, Nintendo was looking ahead, investing that money into future projects such as the Game & Watch and development of their first programmable ROM cartridge video game system, the Famicom. In fact, the Color TV continued on until 1983. Sales from it and the Game & Watch, which released in 1980, fully funded the R&D for the Famicom that was released in 1983.
Game over, man! It's game over!